Annals of Arithmancy, Chapter 18, The Next Generation. Disclaimer: Hogwarts, Hoggy, wordy Hogwarts, teach us about J.K. Rowling, please. The joke at the beginning of this chapter is a big part of the reason why Sirius survived the war in this story. 31st of July, 2008. Harry's boys sat with rapt attention as Sirius recounted his tale. James, 6, and Bill, not quite 4, were at that age where tales of heroic and whitewashed battles were starting to become fascinating, and they watched him reenacting the scene with wide eyes. The Death Eaters had regrouped in the middle of the Department of Mysteries, and they followed your dad and Aunt Hermione into the Hall of Space. I was sneaking along behind them under an invisibility cloak, leading the order to them. They were hiding behind Jupiter and Saturn, but there was nowhere else to run, and they were outnumbered. Some people were being too slow, so I knew it was up to me to save the day. It was time for a distraction. So I took off the cloak and walked up to the leader of the Death Eaters, the evil Lucius Malfoy. Lucius whipped his long blonde hair, trying to show it off to intimidate me, but it still wasn't as good as mine. "Wait, what?" Harry said from across the room. The boys giggled. "And then," Sirius continued, "I walked up to him, got right in his face." Here he leaned forward so he was almost nose to nose with the little boys. "And then he said, 'Why so serious?'" "Why so serious?" the boys squealed. "Sirius, I swear if you make that joke one more time," Harry called. And I said, "Do you want to know how I got these tattoos?" Hermione wandered over to the group to intervene, bouncing Emmy in her arms. At 9 months, Emmy was still a little ball of energy, but she'd mellowed a bit once she started sleeping through the night. She also had a full head of curly red hair, and Hermione had a suspicion she was going to turn out looking a lot like her mother, except ginger and freckled. She intended to save her a lot of trouble and teach her some hairstyling spells early. She looked down at Sirius and the Potter boys. "I think the real story's better, Sirius," she said. "James, Billy," she got their attention, "you know what your Uncle Sirius really did? He took off the cloak and said, 'Get away from my godson,' and then he punched Lucius in the face." "I'm not sure you need to tell them that either, Hermione," Harry said. "Hey, they need to learn how awesome I am sometime," Sirius insisted. Hermione rolled her eyes, but she said, "It was pretty impressive. Not the best night, though." She went on and sought out Ginny, who turned out to be in the kitchen, feeding Lily. Lily had also inherited Weasley red hair, unlike her brothers, but it was straight hair, so they could still tell her and Emmy apart from behind. The two girls already seemed to get on famously. "Hi, Hermione, how's it going?" Ginny said brightly. "Pretty well," Hermione said. "Just Sirius being serious out there." Tell me about it. He's been like that all month, and I thought his jokes were bad enough before." "Hello," another voice said. "Is this Las Mamas Club in here?" Juanita came into the room and pulled up a seat. "I suppose it can be if you want," Ginny said with a chuckle. Ron and Juanita had married last autumn, and they were already expecting their first child, although Juanita was barely starting to show. George had suggested that if they had a boy, they had to name him Inigo Montoya Weasley. Juanita had not been amused. Ron was even less amused when he learnt the character's backstory. That may have been the most impressive prank the family had ever seen him pull. In any case, with 6 young mothers in the Weasley family, plus Molly, they probably could start a club if they wanted. "My tia Imelda always used to joke about her sisters having Las Mamas Club, since she was the only one who wasn't married," Juanita explained as she waved and cooed to the babies. "Mostly we're trying to give them the commotion of the party in controlled doses," Ginny said. "You'll learn to do that pretty quick, especially if their nap is interrupted." Juanita gave them an uneasy smile. "I'll keep that in mind." 14th of August, 2008. Hermione admired the document she'd received in the post, the culmination of many years of hard, if intermittent, work. It looked official even by magical standards, all high-quality parchment and calligraphed letters. Except the parchment was actually colored paper, and the fine calligraphy came out of a laser printer. Muggles had quicker and cheaper ways of doing things. But it did come in a nice leather folder and was suitable for framing. She had already chosen a place to frame it, on the wall of the parlor. The study might have been more appropriate, since it was traditional to hang in one's office, but anyone who actually came into the house for an arithmancy consultation would meet her in the parlor, so she quickly had it framed and hung there. Philosophe Doctor in Mathematica. 11th of August, 2009. The following year felt like a year of transitions, some completions, and some new beginnings. The Weasley family celebrated the birth of Julio Rodrigo Weasley just before Christmas. Around the same time, Hermione and Audrey both discovered they were pregnant again. Hermione and George weren't exactly planning to have another baby that soon, but they were still overjoyed about it. Musa completed his apprenticeship in January, and Hermione didn't put out an ad for another. She probably wouldn't for at least 2 years, with 2 infants at home. In the meantime, however, at some prompting from Hermione, Fred and George had taken up a new project for the shop, something she had suggested ages ago, but they'd let lie for the past 10 years. Magical virtual reality. Or, actually, they already had that from the patented Daydream charms. Those were simple to make, and could produce some truly amazing scenarios. Even Hermione still used them from time to time. However, this kind of virtual reality was meant as a game. They even called them ethereal games. It wasn't easy. Playing a game of Quidditch, for example, in a daydream with realistic and consistent competition was beyond the capabilities of a normal human imagination, and it turned out to be too complicated to really do it right with a charm bracelet. In fact, every game or sport needed its own rather complex rune array, and some were outright impossible. In a daydream, you could theoretically have no-holds-barred dueling, but dueling was so complicated that they couldn't really build anything between "wouldn't challenge a competent 5th year" and "instantly killed by dark wizards." Though on the other hand, it did give Hermione a chance to explore her lingering unease with dueling in a controlled fashion, which had never fully gone away after the war. Regardless, the Quidditch ones sold very well, and even professional teams were interested. George and Hermione celebrated their 10th anniversary with a bit less gusto than they had originally planned, Hermione being 8 months pregnant at the time and also caring for a toddler. It was hard to believe it had been 10 years, even though so much had happened. That Marcus, and Nadia and Sasha would be going off to Hogwarts very soon only underscored the point. Lucy Weasley, Percy's and Audrey's second, was born that same month, and just a few weeks later it was Hermione's turn. This birth was a little easier than the first, which was common for second labors. Though it was still no walk in the park and ran clean through the night, the family was celebrating the birth of a healthy baby boy in the morning. "He'll be sharing a birthday with his Aunt Ginny," George pointed out. "I bet she'll love that," Hermione said. She did. "Oh, we're going to have so much fun," Ginny said when she found out, with an evil grin. "So what's his name?" Charlie asked. "I've been out of the loop." "Robin Oliver Granger Weasley," George said proudly. "Robin?" "Robin!" Emily squeaked in George's arms. "You know, like Robin Hood," he said. "There aren't many famous pranksters in history, so it was the best one I could find. We can't very well call him Loki, even in the magical world, and I don't think Ollie would have wanted us to stick him with his first name." "Fair," Charlie said, remembering the Quidditch-obsessed little second year who had barged his way into the team in Charlie's 5th. "Good luck to all of you." 1st of September 2009. The day had finally arrived. Septima brought young Marcus Aurelius to King's Cross Station to begin his first year at Hogwarts. Hermione came out for a short time, leaving George to watch the kids, in order to see him off. The day was warm and sunny, and about as cheerful as she could ever remember seeing it in the station. There were few people she knew closely, though. She recognized a handful of parents she'd known as older students in school, but that was all. Most of her generation's children were too young yet. This would be the first year in which a precious few Hogwarts students had been born after the war ended, making it an especially joyous occasion. Septima looked considerably grayer than when she'd been a teacher. She was doing well for herself and her son, but she'd never fully recovered from the war. Marcus looked unsettled, a complex mix of emotions playing on his face. He looked very formal in his Hogwarts uniform, reminding Hermione of Percy. Both of them waved to Hermione when they saw her. "What? I don't look that bad, do I?" Hermione said, seeing the look on Septima's face when she drew close. Septima shook her head with a sad sort of smile. "As bad as you got sometimes when you were in school, and you got into some pretty dark places back then." "I'll have you know I am sleeping, Septima, just not at predictable hours." She chuckled. "Babies will do that to you. Thank you for coming, Hermione." "I wouldn't miss it. Marcus, are you excited to go?" "Yeah, I guess," Marcus said, with an expression that showed he was anything but. Hermione bent down to get a closer look at him. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He said hesitantly, "I don't want to be like him, you know. What if people figure out who I am?" Ah, that. Marcus had been cursed with his father's pale, freckled skin and straw-colored hair, and he always wanted his hair cut short to minimize the resemblance. He had been accosted a couple of times by people who wanted to take their anger at Barty Crouch out on him. It was never easy for him from the time he was first found out, which was very early given the kidnapping. He'd been traumatized by that incident, and even now, 7 years later, the stigma of his father being a Death Eater and a rapist weighed on him. "You won't be the only child of Death Eaters there," Hermione said. "Don't worry. I don't think that many people your age know about Crouch being your father, and none of the teachers will bring it up. There aren't any Snapes at Hogwarts anymore." "But what if someone's parents tell them and they tell everybody?" "Then just tell them who raised you," she said, "and that you've got me for a godmother. That should shut them up." "You aren't anything like him, Marcus," Septima assured him in practiced tones. "I knew your father when he was a student, and he was, frankly, crazy from the start. You're so much kinder and more thoughtful than he was, even now." Marcus hugged her. "Thanks, Mum," he said. "I still don't want to be in Slytherin, though. Sorry." "That's all right, I understand," she said. "I just want you to be happy wherever you go." "Marcus," Hermione spoke up again, "people don't see Slytherin as such a bad thing anymore. I tried to get rid of that prejudice in my last year, and Georgina after me. But if you really don't want to go there, you won't. When you're sorted, they take your wishes into account too. No one ever gets sorted someplace that will make them unhappy." That was about the most she could say for sure. People absolutely did get sorted to houses they didn't fit well in at first, but only because the hat was certain they were better suited to it, and it swore it was always right. They were interrupted by another familiar voice as Sasha Lupin came onto the platform with his mother. "Why do I have to take the train?" the currently angry red-haired boy complained. "We live in Hogsmeade. We live in the castle half the time." "Because it's tradition," Dora said. She'd brought Sasha alone since Remus was busy preparing for the school year. "You have to do it for at least your first year and your last year. Now have fun, make some friends. I'll see you tonight at the feast." "Okay, Mum. And don't try to go into the girls' dorms tonight, or ever. You can get in as a girl, but they'll throw you out if you change back, including in your sleep." "I know, Mum," he groaned. Hermione tried not to laugh while Marcus blushed deep red, overhearing. Sasha was starting to get curious about such things, and was starting to try turning into a girl sometimes. Dora said that probably nothing would come of it long term, but he was sure to cause trouble while he was in school, speaking from her own experience. Hermione gave another look around the platform. A little farther down, Fleur had Nadia with her, trying not to cry as she let her go. Then she looked the other way and froze when she spotted possibly the most hated person still walking the streets of Britain free. Narcissa Malfoy. After all these years, she'd nearly forgotten that young Columbia Malfoy would be starting at Hogwarts this year too. And, unfortunately for her, Columbia took after her parents in looks every bit as much as her brother had. She had a pale, thin face, long blonde hair, and gray eyes. The look on her face was very different, though. Where Draco's pinched features had carried a perpetual sneer, Lucius's had always held an air of arrogance, and Narcissa during the war had seemed to exude a constant, faint disgust. Columba's face merely looked sad and lonely. It had to be hard for her. Her brother killed Dumbledore, her father was instrumental in Bill's death, and her mother was at the wrong place at the wrong time and had inadvertently set off that whole disaster. Narcissa met Hermione's eyes and she stopped cold. They stared at each other for a long moment, Narcissa clearly worried Hermione would attack. For the past 11 years they had avoided each other. Hermione had never spoken to Columba at all, and she and Septima had agreed to keep Marcus away from her until now, not because they blamed her for anything, but because they still didn't fully trust her mother. Hermione turned around to check on Fleur again. She didn't seem to have noticed Narcissa. It wouldn't surprise her if she'd actively told Nadia to keep away from Columba. They might have to discuss that later. Dora and Sasha were the only ones who had occasional contact with the Malfoys, so they at least knew each other. Hermione bent down and spoke to Marcus again, more quietly this time. "Speaking of people who have to live down to their families, that's Columba Malfoy over there. She's got as much bad family history as you do, and she still has her birth name. Listen, if you have classes with her, I want you to be nice to her, and make sure Nadia is nice to her too. You understand?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, Aunt Hermione." "Good. Now have fun up there." Marcus got on the train with the other students, and Hermione saw him out of the station before returning home. The next day, all the families excitedly learnt about their children's first night at Hogwarts, and, of course, the results of the sorting. Even Hermione, who tried not to put so much stock in the sorting anymore, was eager to hear it. Marcus Vector was the son of a Slytherin, the grandson of a Slytherin, and was raised by a Slytherin, and had a godmother worthy of Slytherin. But even so, it was no surprise when Hermione learnt he was sorted into Ravenclaw. Nadia also went to Ravenclaw, while Sasha wound up in Hufflepuff, much to Dora's delight. Marcus made a note that Columba Malfoy was in Slytherin, but he didn't describe her reaction. Hermione was a bit surprised when she found herself hoping the girl would be all right there. 24th of December, 2009. "I'm glad you could make it back for Christmas, Luna," Hermione said. "Thank you, Hermione," Luna replied. With their globe-trotting lifestyle, Neville and Luna often weren't in England for the holidays, but this year they had come home and thrown a surprise Christmas Eve party at Longbottom Manor. It also gave Luna a chance to show off her new dress, a white, blue, and silver thing that looked sort of like a snowflake. Her fashion sense seemed to have improved in the past decade. "Of course, I think we'll be staying in England for a while now," Luna added. "Oh, why's that?" "Because I'm pregnant." "What?" A few people near them stopped and stared. Neville tapped Luna on the arm. "Luna, love, we were supposed to announce that to the whole party," he said. "Oh, right, sorry," she said. Then she ran to the front of the ballroom and called out loudly to the guests. "Happy Christmas, everyone! Neville and I have an announcement. I'm pregnant. Oh, and it's twins!" Neville smacked his forehead and shook his head with an affectionate smile on his face. "Every time," he muttered as the guests burst into applause. "I feel like there's a story there," Hermione said when Luna returned to them. "Honestly, I wasn't sure if you were planning to... with all your travel." "No, I understand," Neville said. "We've been traveling the world most of this time, so we never thought it was an appropriate time to have kids. But Luna told me she wanted a baby for our 10th anniversary, and I don't know how she did it, but she must have caught the very first time, and with twins." "Magic!" Luna said cheerfully. Neville laughed. "If you say so, Luna. Anyway, it certainly beats tinware." 13th of January, 2010. Hermione and George had discussed long into the night whether they should travel to help here. Traveling internationally with a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old wasn't easy, even with magic. Even if Emmy could be left with an aunt or uncle or grandparents, Hermione wasn't going to leave Robin for an extended period, and there was only so much work she could do while taking care of a baby. Ultimately, some late-night conversations with Minister Roberts, who was in contact with what was left of the Haitian ministry, clarified the situation and what they might be able to do. Simply put, the Haitian ministry was in shambles. The earthquake had struck so close to Port-au-Prince that the city was literally decimated. Estimates were just starting to come in, but people said it looked as bad as the Boxing Day tsunami 5 years ago, with possibly as many as a tenth of the Muggle population of the city dead. The Ministry of Magic building, though sturdier than the Muggle buildings, was partially buried in the quake. Magical casualties numbered in the dozens, and they were still digging out survivors, which was dangerous in itself given the risk of aftershocks. That gave Hermione pause, and the minister told her everyone would understand if she decided to stay at home, but she asked if there was anything in the rescue effort that would require her specific skills, and she was told there was. Geomancy. And that was something she could do from the relative safety of a hotel room. So now Hermione was in Haiti, working with several local wizards, poring over geological and ley line maps spread out over the kitchen table of their suite, with the geomancer's map right in the middle. They were coordinating with surveyors and rescuers through enchanted parchment and communication rings like she'd made for the Order. The most important task was watching for aftershocks. That was what the geomancy was for. By monitoring the ley lines, not only could they detect an earthquake as fast or faster than a Muggle seismograph, if you knew how to read them, you could learn more about the earthquake faster and predict how bad it would be. With good reflexes, given the speed of seismic waves, they could communicate a warning to rescuers as much as 30 seconds in advance. 11th of August, 2010. Neville's and Luna's twins were born on the summer solstice, a boy and a girl. They named them August and Xenia, which seemed to suit the unconventional family very well. Meanwhile, George and Hermione received a different kind of surprise. Windrose Field was becoming better and better known, and now it seemed that other wizarding families were interested in moving into Hawkhouse Green. There was some talk of buying one of the Muggle farms on the other side of the road and convincing them to sell, but the Granger Weasleys shut that down quickly. They liked their neighbors, and Emmy was already friendly with the Dysons' youngest. But one family was prepared. They bought the one remaining plot of land on Hawkhouse Green Lane, next door to Windrose Field, and built a house of their own there, much smaller and simpler than Windrose Field, but still quite homey. So by the time Robin turned 1, there were 2 magical families in the neighborhood, the Granger Weasleys and the Whitbys. They got on well, and Emmy was happy to have another friend. For the moment, all was well.